Hey all, I am Chen, and this is our story.
My name is Vrethak Son, and I have covered 43 wars. I have filed dispatches from the burning methane fields of Koreth Prime, where the atmosphere itself catches fire and the soldiers fight blind in suits that cook them slowly from the inside. I have crouched in the shadow of a collapsed hive citadel on Muresh 7 while 3 separate factions tried to kill me for different theological reasons. I once spent 11 days embedded with the Dracari siege fleet, which, if you know anything about the Dracari, means I spent 11 days wondering which of my organs they were planning to eat first. The point is, I am not easily impressed, and I am absolutely categorically professionally not afraid. So when Supreme Hunter Commander Vax Thul personally approved my embed request with the 6th Predator Fleet, I was not nervous. I was thrilled. The Vrethkai were the story. They were the story of the century, maybe the millennium, the most successful predator civilization in recorded galactic history. 1,400 confirmed hunts against species rated Class 4 Deathworld and above, a kill record that made the hegemony's war colleges weep with professional envy. And now they were pointed at Earth. I boarded their flagship, the Eternal Hunger, with my recording equipment, my press credentials, and what I can only describe in retrospect as catastrophic optimism. Let me tell you about the Vrethkai, because if you are reading this from whatever comfortable corner of the galaxy you inhabit, you need to understand what they are before you understand why any of this matters. They are tall, approximately 3 meters at standing height, though they rarely stand fully upright because, as one of their junior hunters explained to me with genuine puzzlement, standing upright is a prey species behavior. They have 4 upper limbs, 2 for locomotion and 2 for what they call craft, meaning the intricate, horrible business of building the weapons that end things. Their sensory array is frankly offensive: 7 distinct chemical receptors, thermal imaging, that can read a heartbeat through 2 centimeters of reinforced hull plating, acoustic processing so refined they can identify individual biological signatures by the specific sound of blood moving through arteries. They have been hunting things for 600,000 years. They are, by any reasonable metric, terrifying. And in the officers' mess of the Eternal Hunger, 3 days into our approach to human-controlled space, I watched Supreme Hunter Commander Vax Thul eat something that was still moving and explained to me, with genuine warmth, that the humans were going to be the most entertaining hunt of the current generation. The reports from the hegemony scouts are extraordinary, he told me, gesturing with a limb that had 4 elbows, a Deathworld species that achieved spaceflight, mammalian-based biology, emotional regulatory systems so poorly developed that they frequently make tactical decisions based on something their neurologists call grief. Can you imagine? Grief as a combat variable. He made a sound that I believe was laughter, though it registered at a frequency that made my secondary ears bleed slightly. We have hunted species that could collapse stars, he said. We have hunted species that existed simultaneously across 11 dimensions. We have never hunted a species that cried about its dead and then kept fighting. It will be, he paused to appreciate the word, novel. I wrote all of this down. I thought it was wonderful color for the opening chapter. The first sign that something was wrong came on day 6. I should have recognized it for what it was. I am a journalist. Pattern recognition is literally my profession, but the Vrethkai are extraordinarily good at controlling information within their own ships, and I was, in their estimation, somewhere between a useful propaganda tool and a particularly interesting pet. Neither category gets briefed on command decisions. What I noticed was the pace. We should have reached the outer boundary of human-controlled space on day 4. We did not reach it on day 4. We did not reach it on day 5. The fleet dropped out of transit, held position, and the senior hunters disappeared into sealed command chambers for 18 hours. When Vax Thul emerged, he was different, not frightened. The Vrethkai don't do frightened, at least not visibly. But there was something in his posture, a subtle compression of the upper limbs, a slight narrowing of the sensory array that I had seen once before, in the Dracari fleet. Right before they turned around and went home without telling me why. A minor navigational correction, he told me. Nothing relevant to your story. The fleet moved again. We approached the boundary markers from a different angle. On day 8, we stopped again. Her name, I eventually learned, was Specialist Kale Morrow. I did not learn this from the Vrethkai. I learned it from a data fragment I was absolutely not supposed to access, attached to a tactical file that someone had encrypted with what they clearly believed was sufficient security, and which was not, because I have been doing this for 40 years and I have cracked harder locks on more hostile ships than this one. The file was labeled, in the Vrethkai command script, Human Incident Echo 7. It had been flagged classified by 4 separate senior commanders. It had been viewed according to the access log 47 times in the past 6 days. 47 times. In a command structure that prided itself on processing information once and acting, someone in this fleet was watching this file over and over again. I watched it once. I watched it for 11 minutes. Then I sat very quietly in my bunk and thought about my career choices. Echo 7 was footage from the Vrethkai's first contact engagement with a human defensive outpost 14 months ago. The Vrethkai called it a preliminary assessment hunt, which is their term for what happens when they test a new species' defenses by destroying something small and waiting to see what screams. Standard procedure. They had done it 600 times. The screams, or the silence, or the panicked retreat, all of it told them something useful about what they were dealing with. What happened at Echo 7 did not follow the pattern. The outpost was a research station. 32 humans, according to the pre-engagement intelligence, scientists, mostly. A token security detail of 4. The Vrethkai sent a single hunter lance, 12 ships, the kind of force you send when you want to make a point without committing actual resources. The research station lasted 4 minutes. The Vrethkai commander on the recording, a hunter named Grex Pala, who I later discovered was no longer serving with the fleet, logged this as a successful preliminary assessment and began the standard withdrawal sequence. What happened next took 6 hours. Grex Pala's hunter lance was home to their command cruiser within 3 hours. By that point, 2 of his 12 ships had been destroyed and 1 was venting atmosphere from a strike that, according to the damage analysis, had come from a human vessel, 1/10 the mass of the attacking ship, moving at a velocity that should have made precision targeting impossible, using a weapons configuration that did not match any human military classification in the Vrethkai database. Because it wasn't a military vessel, it was a modified cargo hauler. The weapon systems had been improvised. The targeting solutions had been calculated manually by a human over 6 hours of pursuit, while the human ship's life support systems were failing, while 2 of its 3 crew members were dead, while the sole surviving crew member had 17 distinct physiological trauma markers that the Vrethkai medical analysis flagged as incompatible with continued function. The human kept functioning. The Vrethkai ship did not. The file ended with a damage report and a notation from the fleet's chief intelligence analyst, written in the kind of careful, neutral language that analysts use when they are trying very hard not to say what they actually think. The notation read, "Crew of destroyed vessel identified. Specialist Cale Morrow, age 24, assigned to Research Station Echo 7 Support Logistics. No combat training beyond basic certification. Next of kin, 2 parents, 1 sibling. Station personnel records indicate Morrow had personal relationships with all 32 station casualties. Recommend further behavioral study before escalation. Note, pursuit was maintained for 6 hours, and 12 minutes after combat viability should have been 0. Note, final weapons discharge was accurate to within 4 centimeters at a range of 11,000 kilometers. Note, we do not currently have an explanation for either of these data points." I read that last line 3 times. We do not currently have an explanation. The Vrethkai, who had hunted things that collapsed stars, who had 600,000 years of predator intelligence and a database of behavioral profiles that covered every significant species in 4 galactic arms. They did not have an explanation. I requested an interview with Vax Thal that evening. He agreed, which surprised me, and received me in his command chamber, which surprised me more. The command chamber of a Vrethkai hunter commander is not a space you are typically invited into unless the hunter commander is making a specific kind of point about the power differential between you, or unless he wants to talk. He wanted to talk, I think. Looking back, he needed to. Even apex predators, it turns out, feel something like the urge to say words out loud when those words are otherwise going to rattle around inside their skulls until something cracks. "You accessed the Echo 7 file," he said. It was not a question. "I did," I said. There was no point in lying to a creature with 7 chemical receptors and acoustic blood monitoring. He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that I became aware of the sound the ship's engines made. A low harmonic that I had stopped consciously hearing 3 days in and was now hearing again very clearly. "We have a file," he said finally. "Not Echo 7. A different file. A compilation. Our analysts have been building it since the first incident. 73 documented cases of human retaliatory action following what we classified as successful preliminary engagements. 73. I kept my expression neutral. The Vrethkai had conducted by their own previous briefing 9 preliminary assessment operations in human space. In each case, Vaxthol continued, and his voice had dropped to a register I had not heard from him before, something quieter, something I can only describe as careful. The responding human was not a military asset. In each case, the responding human had a personal connection to the casualties. In each case, the response was delayed, not immediate panic, not immediate retreat, delayed, hours, sometimes days. And then, he stopped. And then, I asked, the precise, patient, without any apparent regard for their own survival probability. He looked at me with all 7 sensory receptors fully engaged, which is not a comfortable experience. We hunt things that fight to survive. We hunt things that fight for territory. We hunt things that fight for their species. We have tactical models for all of these motivations. They are predictable. They have limits. A creature fighting to survive will eventually calculate that survival requires retreat. A creature fighting for territory will accept a boundary. A creature fighting for its species will accept a ceasefire when the species-level threat is removed. He leaned forward. Our models do not have a category, he said, very quietly. For a creature that fights for specific dead individuals, who calculates nothing, who does not retreat when retreat is logical, who does not accept a ceasefire because the ceasefire does not bring back the specific people who are gone. Our models do not have a category for a species that carries its dead with it as a weapon system. I wrote that down. I wrote every word of it down. The girl in the Echo 7 file, I said. Kale Morrow is currently, Vaxthul said, serving as a tactical specialist with a human response fleet that has been tracking our current position for the past 4 days. I stopped writing. She survived, I said. She did. And she found us. She found us. He made that sound again, the one that made my ears bleed, but this time it did not sound like laughter. We are the Vrethkai. We have hunted across 6 galaxies. We do not get found. We do the finding. He stood up, all 3 meters of him, and I realized he had been sitting in a compressed, careful posture the entire conversation. The posture, I now understood, was not professional composure. She brought 17 ships, he said. 14 of them are converted civilian vessels. 3 of them are pre-classified military designation. Our threat analysis gives us a 93% probability of engagement victory. He paused. Our threat analysis gave us a 97% probability at Echo 7. I looked at him. Supreme Hunter Commander, I said. Are you telling me the most feared predator fleet in the galaxy is considering retreat from 17 ships? He looked back at me for a long time. I am telling you, he said, that we are currently attempting to determine whether the 4% discrepancy between our model and reality is a rounding error. He turned away, and that the girl has been in that lead ship for 4 days, not sleeping, not eating, according to our biological monitoring. He paused, and I heard something I had never heard in a Vrethkai voice before, something that took me a moment to name, waiting. I went back to my bunk. I pulled up everything I could find on Kale Morrow. Age 24. Ranked last in her logistics training cohort. Cited twice for insubordination during practical exercises. Described by 3 separate supervising officers as too emotional for field work. Too emotional. I looked at the Echo 7 footage again. The cargo hauler. The 6-hour pursuit. The 17 trauma markers. The 4-centimeter accuracy at 11,000 kilometers. Too emotional. I thought about what Vaxthul had said. A species that carries its dead as a weapons system. I thought about 32 researchers on a station that lasted 4 minutes. I thought about one 24-year-old logistics specialist who knew all 32 of them by name. And I thought for the first time in 43 wars that I might want to be somewhere else when this story ended. Let me tell you something they do not teach in journalism school. There is a specific quality of silence that exists only on warships. It is different from the silence of empty space, which is just absence. It is different from the silence of a sleeping crew, which is populated, full of breath and heartbeat, and the small unconscious sounds of living things at rest. The silence I am describing is the silence of a crew that is awake, and aware and deliberately not speaking, because speaking would require them to say something out loud that they have all already agreed, without discussion, they would rather not make real. The eternal hunger had been making that silence for 11 hours. I walked its corridors and I counted hunters. not because I expected the count to mean anything, but because I am a journalist and counting things is what I do when I am trying to feel useful. 347 Vrethkai, the most decorated predator fleet in 4 galactic arms, each one of them capable of hunting apex species that would make most civilizations simply stop having a military and start writing apology letters to the universe. Every single one of them was watching the same display feed. Kale Morrow's 17 ships, holding position, 11 hours, not advancing, not retreating, not broadcasting on any frequency, just sitting in the dark at the edge of engagement range, like a thought you cannot stop having. I found Chief Intelligence Analyst Sorik in the data processing bay, which is where I had learned to find him when the fleet's mood got heavy, because Sorik was the kind of creature who processed discomfort by generating more data. He was surrounded by screens when I arrived, each one running a different behavioral analysis, and he had the look of someone who had been running analyses for so long that the analyses had stopped telling him anything new and he was still running them anyway, because stopping would mean accepting that he already had all the information he was going to get. "She hasn't moved," I said. "No," he said. 11 hours, 14 minutes, and he checked a secondary display. 32 seconds. I pulled up a stool. "What does your model say?" Sarek made a sound that was not the bleeding ear laugh. It was flatter, more tired. "My model says she should have moved 4 times by now. Tactically, her optimal window for the first engagement pass closed approximately 6 hours ago. Her optimal window for a feint and withdraw maneuver closed 90 minutes ago. Every hour she holds position, our firing solutions improve. Every hour she holds position, her fuel reserves decrease. My model says that holding position for this long, with this fleet configuration against our assessed capabilities, is," she paused, searching for the precise word, "irrational." "But," I said. He looked at me. "My model said Echo 7 was irrational too. The classified briefing happened at hour 13. I was not invited. This was expected. I attended anyway, by the simple method of finding the ventilation access point adjacent to the briefing chamber, which is a technique that works on approximately 60% of warships because ship designers are engineers, not journalists, and engineers believe that if something is not on the official schematic it does not exist." Vax Thule stood at the center of the chamber. Around him, his senior commanders, the best hunters the Vrethkai had produced in 3 generations, each one of them with a kill record that read like a geographical survey of catastrophe. They were having an argument. In 30 years of covering the Vrethkai, in every piece of pre-trip research I had done, in every interview with exo-military historians and alien behavioral specialists, I had encountered exactly 0 documented instances of a Vrethkai command council having an argument. They were a consensus species in combat contexts. The hunt hierarchy was absolute. The Supreme Hunter Commander's assessment was the assessment. Vax Thule was not currently winning his argument. "The probability matrix has not changed," one of the senior commanders was saying. His name was Hart Ven, and he had personally hunted a species that reproduced by splitting into independent combat units. He was not a creature accustomed to hesitation. 93% engagement victory. Even accounting for the Echo 7 variants, we are looking at a tactically simple operation against an inferior force. "The 7%, said another voice, is a rounding error. Echo 7 was a rounding error." Silence. "She was one human," Rathven said, "in a cargo hauler, with improvised weapons. She is currently," said the voice I now recognized as belonging to Vax Thule, speaking with the particular quietness of a commander who has already made his decision and is explaining it rather than debating it, commanding 17 vessels, with crews that our intelligence indicates were personally recruited, who all have," he paused, "specific reasons to be here." I pressed closer to the ventilation panel. "She recruited them," someone said. "How?" "The same way she fought," Vax Thule said. "She remembered everyone we killed. She went to their families. She went to the people who trained them and loved them and worked beside them. She did this for 14 months. She built a fleet out of grief." The chamber was quiet. "That is not a military structure," Rathven said, but his voice had changed. The certainty had developed a texture. "No," Vax Thule agreed. "It is not. It is something we do not have a classification for. I want to be precise about the next part because I think precision matters here. I have spent my career arguing in various publications that the Vrethkai are the most dangerous military force in the known galaxy, not because of their physical capabilities, which are considerable, and not because of their technology, which is exceptional, but because of their absolute psychological stability in combat contexts. They do not panic. They do not freeze. They do not second-guess. They are 600,000 years of predator evolution distilled into a military philosophy, and the core of that philosophy is a perfect, unshakable confidence in their own assessment of reality. At hour 14, I watched that confidence develop a crack. It started small. A junior hunter in the corridor outside the briefing chamber, checking his weapons array for the third time in 20 minutes, not because he expected it to have changed, but because checking something 3 times makes it feel more real. A navigation officer recalculating the fleet's retreat vectors, which were not needed, which had not been requested, which she was running anyway. Sorek still in his database pulling up the Echo 7 footage again for what the access log would later show me was the 51st time. The crack was not tactical. There was still 93%. The math had not changed. The crack was that everyone on the Eternal Hunger had now spent 14 hours looking at 17 ships that would not move, commanded by a 24-year-old who had every reason to be dead, who had instead spent 14 months doing something that no Vrethkai behavioral model had a category for, and the looking had done something to them that the threat assessment had not. The looking had made it personal, and personal, I was beginning to understand, was the specific territory where humans had the advantage. At hour 15 she broadcast, not a military channel, not a standard hailing frequency. She broadcast on the emergency survivor frequency, the one that every spacefaring civilization used for the same purpose, the one that any ship in distress sent when it needed to be found. The Eternal Hunger's communication systems processed the signal automatically. It came through every speaker on the ship simultaneously, because that was what the emergency survivor protocol did. It went everywhere. And by the time Vax Thul's communications officer reached to cut the feed, the fleet had already heard the first 4 seconds. She had a young voice, lower than I expected, very steady. She said, "My name is Kale Morrow. I was assigned to Research Station Echo 7, Logistics Division. 14 months ago, 32 people I knew were killed in what the Vrethkai Fleet Command classified as a preliminary assessment operation. I want you to know their names." The communications officer cut the feed. In the 15 seconds it took her to process the command and execute it, Kale Morrow had said 9 names. I know this because I was recording. I know it also because for the rest of that day I watched Vrethkai hunters, in 1s and 2s and small silent groups, pull up the broadcast on personal devices, on data pads, on the tiny secondary screens built into their weapons arrays, and listen to the remaining 23 names. Not all of them, not every hunter, but enough. Vax Thul called me to the command chamber at hour 17. He was standing this time, full height, 3 meters, all 4 limbs extended, the posture of a Vrethkai commander who has made a decision he is certain of. It should have been reassuring. It was not, because I had learned to read Vrethkai body language over the past weeks, and the posture of certain decision, and the posture of decision made because the alternatives were worse look almost identical unless you know which one you're looking for. "I am going to tell you something," he said, "that you will publish. That is generally what journalists do with things they're told," I said. "I want you to understand that I am choosing to tell you this. It is not a failure of security. It is a deliberate communication. I had my recorder running. I understand. We are withdrawing from human space," he said. I kept my expression neutral, a journalist's first skill and hardest one, permanently, indefinitely. He turned to look at the display still showing Morrow's 17 ships. The Vrethkai have withdrawn from hunts before, twice. Once when the prey species collapsed its own star system rather than be taken. Once when the biological contamination risk exceeded acceptable fleet loss parameters. He paused. "This will be the 3rd withdrawal in our recorded history." "And you want that published?" I said. "A tactical withdrawal, framed how?" He looked at me for a long time. "Not as a tactical withdrawal," he said quietly. "As a warning." I waited. "There is a concept in Vrethkai military philosophy," he said. "It does not translate cleanly into galactic standard. The closest approximation is, the prey that costs more than the hunt is worth. Every species has a price, territory, resources, strategic value. You measure the price against the cost and you make a calculation." He paused. "Humans have no price, because the cost of hunting them does not decrease, it accumulates." "Because they remember," I said. "Because they remember," he confirmed. "Every hunter we lose creates more of what is currently sitting 11,000 kilometers off our bow. Every preliminary assessment generates more Kale Morrows. Every operation does not weaken their capacity for retaliation, it expands it. We cannot attrit a species whose motivation compounds rather than degrades. He made a sound. In 14 months she did not heal, she organized. Those are not the same thing. A healed wound does not build 17 ships and sit outside your fleet for 15 hours saying the names of the dead. I wrote all of this down. What do you want me to say? I asked. In the publication. What is the warning? He turned from the display and looked at me with all 7 sensory receptors engaged, and I held very still, because when the most dangerous predator in the galaxy looks at you with everything it has, you hold still. Tell them, he said, that we have hunted creatures that could split atoms with their minds. We have hunted species that existed outside of conventional space-time. We have never in 600,000 years of recorded hunts encountered a species that we could permanently injure without permanently increasing its capacity to destroy us. He paused. Tell them that the Vrethkai do not retreat from strength. We retreat from the specific kind of danger that gets worse the more you engage it. Another pause. Tell them we are retreating from the humans. I filed this story from neutral space, 2 days after the Eternal Hunger and the rest of the 6th Predator Fleet completed their withdrawal from human-controlled territory. I have covered 43 wars. I have watched civilizations collapse and predator species eat the wreckage. I have filed dispatches from places where the concept of survivor is a grammatical technicality. I have, I believed, a reasonable working model of what makes things dangerous. I am revising that model, because I spent 3 weeks on the most feared warship in the galaxy, and what frightened it was not strength, not numbers, not technology. What frightened it was a 24-year-old logistics specialist who was last in her class, who had no combat training beyond basic certification, who had been cited twice for being too emotional, who sat outside a predator fleet for 15 hours and said the names of the dead on an emergency frequency, so that the people who killed them would have to hear the names and know that someone had not forgotten and was not going to forget, and had 14 months of evidence to demonstrate exactly what not forgetting looked like when it had access to a weapons system. The Vrethkai are afraid of humans, not because humans are stronger, not because humans are smarter, not because humans have better ships or better weapons or better tactical doctrine. They are afraid because humans keep score, because a species that quantifies loss in personal terms, that measures defeat not in territory or resources but in specific individuals with names and families and people who love them, that species does not have a threshold at which the grief stops being tactically relevant. It has no point at which the cost of retaliation exceeds the motivation for it. It has no ceiling. In 600,000 years of hunting, the Vrethkai had never encountered a species without a ceiling. I received one final communication from Vax Thul, 48 hours after filing. He had somehow obtained my private dispatch address, which I chose not to think too hard about. The message was short. It read, in full, "The girl has stopped broadcasting. Intelligence confirms she remained on station until we cleared the boundary. She did not pursue. She waited until we were gone, and then she went home. We do not know what home means to her now. We suspect it means something different than it did before Echo 7. This is the part we cannot model, what a human becomes after. Our databases are full of what they do. We have no data on what they carry." There was a pause in the message, the kind that recording systems capture when a speaker stops and does not immediately resume. Then he said, "We think that is the point." Kale Morrow was last in her logistics class. She was cited for being too emotional. She is 24 years old. She led the only action in 15 years that resulted in a Vrethkai fleet withdrawal, without firing a single weapon in the engagement, using nothing except 14 months of memory, and the specific patient unceasing quality of human grief made functional. The Vrethkai have not re-entered human space. As of the filing of this story, they show no signs of doing so. I asked Sorek, the last time I saw him, what their threat level reclassification of humanity would be. He was quiet for a moment. Then he pulled up a classification system I had seen posted throughout the ship, the standard Vrethkai prey categorization, Class 1 through Class 7, 7 being reserved for the most lethal known species. He deleted the entire scale, typed one line. It read, "Unclassifiable. Do not engage." This dispatch was filed by embedded war correspondent Vrethak Son from neutral territory. It is dedicated, with the particular professional respect of someone who does this for a living and understands exactly what it cost, to the 32 researchers of Station Echo 7, whose names Kale Morrow said aloud so that an entire Predator fleet would have to hear them. She said all 32. Every single one.
And that, my friends, is the story of Kale Morrow. lost in her class. Too emotional for field work, 32 names she never forget. One predator fleet that will never return. The Virtukai have hunted across 6 galaxies. They have faced species that collapsed stars. But they have never faced anything like us. Because we don't fight to survive, we fight to remember. And a species that remembers never truly loses. If this story hit different, you know what to do. Like, subscribe and drop a comment below with one word. Just one word that describes humanity. I will read every single word.